So hello, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's our 20th edition of Free Market Roadshow. My name is Marta Rose, and I'm speaking on behalf of Warsaw Enterprise Institute. So I welcome you kindly. This is our 5th edition in Poland that we organize. We are very proud of that. We are organizing it with our partners from Austria, Austrian Economic Center. So Martin will be speaking later on behalf of them. And since we are here in the Warsaw School of Economics, I will also give some words to our partners from the university. So first will be Jakub Kozikowski from the Institute of Geopolitics and Ideas and Strategy, and also Antoni Szydłowski from Students' Research Association for Economics.
Hello everyone, my name is Antoni Szydłowski. I am the Vice President of the Students' Research Society of Economics here at Warsaw School of Economics. We are very pleased to co-host this event alongside the Warsaw Enterprise Institute, the Institute of Geopolitics, Ideas and Strategy, and Political Economy Society. And please enjoy the event. Thank you very much.
So I am Vice Chairman of Institute for Geopolitics, Ideas and Strategy, and we are co-hosting this event second time. We also co-hosted it in the last year, and we believe as young people who are willing to speak about politics and about ideas and strategy, that we think that we should gather people from all kind of political spectrum to talk, to discuss certain topics, and to make something great about this. That's why we are really happy that we can do this together.
To spread the liberal ideas.
Yes, yes, and spread yes, of course. This is the main thing. Discussion is the first topic we are interested in, and yeah, enjoy this conference, and thank you very much.
So thank you. And first we will welcome here on the stage Yaron Brook from the Ayn Rand Institute for the keynote speech. Please.
So those of us who value freedom, value liberty, in particular those of us who value economic freedom, these are challenging times. It seems like the world is moving steadily, at least in the West, but arguably even in places like China and Asia, that the world is moving steadily away from the ideas of freedom, ideas of liberty. We see it on the economic front. Suddenly, tariffs are in vogue. Protectionism is something that people are valuing. The idea of free trade, free exchange, of globalization it has become toxic, has become poisonous. At least, I don't know exactly what it's like in Poland, but once you get out into the world out there, it's very, very antagonistic towards the idea of free trade and the idea of globalization. But even the idea, this goes deeper, because even the idea of free speech is under attack. Certainly in Europe, Europe has always been weak on free speech. You don't have a First Amendment that we do in the United States, which is a big advantage. We have a court that somewhat protects free speech, kind of on principle. But here in Europe, free speech is under attack. It's become criminal to insult people, to actually say something that might offend somebody. And even in the United States, there is a growing temptation to start limiting the ability to speak. Certainly, Donald Trump exemplifies this, but as did Biden before him. Biden put pressure on social media companies to restrict what could and couldn't be said during COVID, what was legit and what wasn't legit in terms of what people posted in Facebook or Twitter during COVID. Trump is trying to do the same thing on even a grander scale. He's trying to manipulate the New York Times and certain media, or what they can and cannot say. Certainly, he wants to make sure that they don't say anything negative about him. And he's got a number of lawsuits against them in order to try to constrain them. And so generally, across the political spectrum, it seems like there's this attack on free speech. So liberty is under attack, I think, throughout the West. In the United States, for the first time, really, you're seeing more and more calls for industrial planning. It's been a very long time since the United States engaged in industrial planning. Again, you'd expect it from the left. The left always does this, but it's gotten more emboldened. So Biden had a whole series of bills that subsidized heavily things like, that are very familiar to you Europeans, things like solar panels and windmills and things like that, but also microchip manufacturing. So the idea is that the state decides who the winners and who the losers are. In this case, the state decided that Intel should be the American champion in making chips. Hasn't worked out very well, as state planning like this almost never does. Industrial planning is back in vogue. But what's surprising is the fact that on the right, you're seeing the same tendency. Right? We expect it from the left. The left has always been interested in getting involved and manipulating the economy. But now, again, populism. Donald Trump is eager to try to influence who the winners and who the losers are, who gets to merge with whom, what industries succeed and what fail. Again, is heavily engaged in significant subsidies and subsidizing of industries and picking winners and losers. The criteria are different than the left, maybe, but the principle is the same. The state should be the decider. The state should overrule markets. And of course, this is common this is the same phenomenon you're seeing in Europe. You're seeing, of course, the left has always been, so we expect that from the left. But now in Europe, the new right is, again, a populist right, an interventionist right, a right that wants to regulate and control in different ways, different industries, but the same principle. The state overrides markets. So what is going on? You're really seeing kind of a phenomena of left and right agreeing more than disagreeing, at least in terms of the economic issues. And where their disagreement seems to be is primarily over social issues. In the United States, abortion, trans, LGBTQ, things like that, that's the disagreement. But really, when it comes to the role of the state in the economy, and even controls over free speech, there seems to be mostly agreement between left and right. In the US, Republicans like to cut taxes and spend like there's no tomorrow. Democrats like to raise taxes and spend like there's no tomorrow. But if you understand how taxes and spending work, you realize that even if you cut taxes and spend, you're really increasing taxes. You're just increasing taxes in the future, or you're increasing taxes or you're sucking capital out of the private markets by borrowing more, right? When you borrow, it's coming out and it's at the expense of private markets. So again, what is going on? What is the basis for all of this? On top of this, add the fact that I think the West is going through kind of an existential crisis, which I think is very much related to both the left and the right's positions. What is the West? Is it a civilization? In what sense is it a civilization? What are the achievements? When did it come from? I mean, you in Europe, my sense is, again, Poland might be different, but certainly the further west you go, the more you get a sense that the West is riddled with guilt. Whatever achievements they had, they have now convinced themselves, at least on the left, that those achievements have come at the expense of other people. They've come from exploitation, colonization, slavery, all the, all the list of sins of the West. That is the left, and in order to kind of appease the guilt, in order to reduce the guilt, not to feel too bad about themselves, they claim there's nothing special about the West. All cultures are equal, multiculturalism, the equality of cultures. So a culture that subjugates women, involved in genital mutilation, is the same as a culture that respects women's rights, for example. On that issue, yeah, we might disagree, but the cultures are all equal. There's no difference between them. So let's merge all those cultures and let's not defend our own because it's insignificant. The response on the right has been, sadly, a response that says, no, Western civilization is something, and it's something that is associated with history, it's something that's associated with race, it's something that's associated with the nation state, it's something that's associated with a particular group, and religion. Religion is always added on to that. So what you're seeing is a rebirth of interest in Christianity, certainly in the United States among young people. You're seeing a rebirth of racism. I don't know if that's prevalent in Europe, but certainly in the United States, there's a massive increase on the right in racism and anti-Semitism. Really, for the first time in my memory, young Republicans, if you look at young Republicans, and if you look at the influences that influence young people, you're seeing a definitely increase in both racist and anti-Semitic sentiments. And that is their response. The civilization, yes, it's white civilization, it's European civilization. That is the essence of it. And I think that all those perspectives, both left and right, the reason why they converge in terms of policy is that underlying both of them is a fundamental shift in how we view the world. The great achievement of the West is individualism. The great achievement of the West is the rejection of collectivism. The great achievement of the West coming out of the Enlightenment is the idea of the sanctity of the individual, the importance of the individual, and the fact that it's the individual's rights that must be protected, and the state's role is the protection of the individual's right. And if you take that perspective, the perspective of individualism, then it's the individual right to trade with whoever he wants. It's not the state's job to dictate to you whose product you should buy, whether that product happens to be from Mexico, from Canada, from China, or from the United States, unless there's a real, and I emphasize real, capital real, national security issue, then it's not the state's problem, it's not the state's business who you trade with. And the whole basis for globalization is that principle. I should be able to buy any product that anybody is willing to offer me for a price we can negotiate and agree upon. I mean, arguably, even the case for more immigration is similar. I should be able to employ anybody who I can agree with, who I can hire from wherever they come for salary that's appropriate, as long as they're working. Right? Freedom means the freedom to interact with other people as the individual sees fit. And if our view is what matters is the individual and protecting his rights, then what we emphasize is freedom and liberty. What we emphasize is openness. What we emphasize is a free market. A free market is fundamentally a market in which individuals pursue their own values. Individuals pursue their own production, their own consumption, free of force, free of coercion. We don't regulate because regulation, again, is imposing on individuals a particular set of rules that some central planner has determined. Unless those rules are really there to protect rights, to protect the individual from coercion, an individualistic political system rejects the whole regulatory enterprise. And, at various degrees, the West adopted individualism, and I think the consequence of that are the last 250 years, the wealth creation, the thriving, the entrepreneurial energy, and the innovation that has resulted in. And the source of continued progress and continued innovation and the continued increase in technology is a product of individualism, entrepreneurship, people going out there, building and creating for themselves, and then trading with others within borders, outside of borders, trading with others wherever the opportunities happen to be. And in my view, it is this individualism that really is at the heart of what's being undermined in the West today. We have forgotten that individualism, what really makes the West special. And we've returned to an ancient ideology, an ideology that's got us into trouble many times, including in the mid part of the 20th century. An ideology that you'd think would be dead, would have been killed by World War II, killed by the fall of the Berlin Wall, the ideology of collectivism. The ideology that what matters is the group, not the individual. The individual is just a cog to be sacrificed to the group. And, you know, the left has its own group categories, and the right has its group categories. The nation and you know, for some, the race. The left, you know, has got its racial categories, particularly in the United States, identity politics, and sexual categories, and lots of other categories, but we're all members of groups, and what matters is that group membership. So I get to tell you, if I'm the enlightened leader, I get to tell you who to trade with and who not. Not because I have insight into what's good for the group, the nation, the state, whatever collective happens to be. Collectivism is on the rise. Collectivism now dominates, is really, to some extent, always dominated the left, but now dominates the left even more. Collectivism dominates the right that used to at least give lip service, if nothing else, to individualism. That is gone. There's no individualistic perspective anymore on the right. And what you have is two collectivistic groups arguing and debating with one another about which group you should be sacrificed to. But you as an individual no longer matter. You as an individual are just a sacrificial animal. And I think that explains the decline in freedom. Because what do we mean by freedom? Freedom means individual freedom. Freedom means the individual's ability to live his life as he sees fit, based on his own judgment in pursuit of his own values. But that means that the individual is the unit of importance. It means that the state is there to protect that freedom. But once that's gone, once the collective is what's important, then who cares about liberty and freedom? We care about, you know, what's good for the collective. And, you know, what's good for the collective is also going to push us towards more authoritarianism, because who gets to decide what's good for the collective? Well, it's somebody who can channel the collective's interest, somebody who has that ability, some authority that can dictate this. And again, we are retreating back into kind of an authoritarianist mentality. Again, I think that's definitely true in the United States. We'll see how it develops in Europe. Maybe the defeat of Orban is a sign that you can only go so far with at least corrupt authoritarianism in Europe today. But I'm not sure it's a repudiation of the collectivistic premise that underlined Orban's regime. So if we care about freedom, if we care about free markets, if we care about capitalism, then what we need to understand is philosophical roots. Philosophical roots in the Enlightenment. The philosophical roots in the Enlightenment, the idea of individualism is the idea of political freedom and political liberty. You cannot separate the two. Collectivism will always lead to less freedom and ultimately to authoritarianism. What we need is a rebirth of individualism. What we need is to return to kind of an Enlightenment view of human beings, an Enlightenment view of our capacity to reason, to think, to create, to build as individuals, and a political perspective, again, of the state's role as protecting the individual, protecting his right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. The battle for capitalism, or the battle for free markets, or the battle for freedom and liberty will not be won on an economic basis. It will be one ultimately on philosophical ideas. And what we're seeing today is a rise of reactionary ideas, pre-Enlightenment ideas. That will not end well. So we need to resurrect the good stuff, which is individualism. Thank you. Yeah. And we've got some time for questions, if there are any. Don't be shy. Yeah, go ahead. Yep. Oh, here we go. Check if it's on.
Hello, hello. Yeah, great. Thank you. It was a very nice speech. I started thinking as you were talking, isn't it that we as humans are evolutionary programmed to be into tribalism, and then the individuality, it hangs on a very thin air of generally a very small generation of philosophers, and the historically unique moment of creation of United States and their export of individualism in the world. But it's just a historical episode in the history of mankind, which will later revert back to the tribalism.
So I think, there's a lot of truth to what you just said. It's a unique period. It's a short period. But I don't view it in terms of it's going against some evolutionary conditioning. I don't think we're conditioned to any kind of ideas. We grew up in tribes because that was the easiest way to survive in a very primitive society. We're not biologically driven towards a tribe. It just was, that was the convenient, that was what worked during time. And then, of course, what that type of organization created were real interest groups to keep the tribal system going, right? The tribal leader, and typically the witch doctor, who usually work together, have a strong incentive to keep the tribal ideas going. And they worked very hard to keep them going. There were episodes in which this broke apart. I think Greek civilization is a good example of maybe not explicit individualism, but certainly a breaking of the idea of tribalism and the birth of philosophy. But I think the way to view it is that individualism is an evolution from that, an ideological evolution, not a biological evolution, but ideological evolution, really from Greece. Rome then has a break, right, with the fall of Rome, and we have a long period of reversion back to kind of tribalism and primitivism and really to some extent barbarism. And civilization is reborn when we rediscover kind of the individual and the individual's mind. It's an achievement. So my view is individualism is an achievement. And it's an achievement that you have to work at. And you have to remind yourself constantly of why it's right and why it's good. And that the lazy, the non-thinking, is the tribal, right? So if we abandon the achievement, if we stop working at it, if we start thinking towards it, yes, we revert to this. Tribalism is when we shut our minds down. But when we think, the reality is, who thinks? Only individuals think. Groups don't think. There's no collective consciousness up here. And we know this, right? And yet we pretend that groups have some kind of identity that is metaphysical, but that doesn't exist. But we have to actively engage in that. Human beings are a conceptual animal. And we can revert to being a non-conceptual animal. But it's not pretty when we do. And again, we did that, I argue, World War II. We did that, pre-Enlightenment. We did that in our tribal past. Let's hold up, so my argument is we constantly need to re-engage with this achievement and constantly reinforce it. And those of us, I think, in this room who believe in liberty and believe in freedom, this is the mission, in a sense. This is the challenge. And it's why it's so hard.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Hi, my name is Tobias. Sorry I came in late, so I might have missed this, but what would be your comment in terms of the role social media plays now to the thesis you gave in terms of you know, in their algorithms.
Yeah. I mean, I think that social media just reinforces a cultural trend. And social media coincided with a lot of bad intellectual trends. It coincided with, on the left, if you will, with the whole woke phenomena and the whole identitarian politics, and it amplified it. It made it much bigger than it was. Usually what happens to these things is they stay in academia, they influence a certain group, and they slowly go out into the culture. And what social media did is it accelerated it. But what happened also is because it accelerated, because it was so visible, it also allowed kind of the opposition, which I think is just as bad, to rise up and say, oh, you want to play identity politics? We know how to play identity politics. We're the majority. We can play identity politics even better than you can. And what you saw is the new right, the alt-right in 2016, which evolved into a new right rising up as an antidote to this. But again, at hyper speed, everything is much faster. Also, everything is a meme. Everything is short. Everything is an appeal to emotion. There's no thought, and so it undermines this idea of us being conceptual. It undermines the idea of us need to think. Instead, we just emote and respond. And at least the American educational system is built to reinforce emotions. So when you're a little kid, you're not taught how to think. You're taught how to feel, right? So you sit around at the age of 7 and you're asked what you think about the latest political issue. A 7-year-old doesn't know anything about the latest political issue. So all they can do is emote, and then the emotions are reinforced. And that is true in every subject, right? So social media just enhances all of that. So I don't think social media is bad in and of itself. I think it's just a reinforcer of ideas, and it's particularly good for bad ideas. Good ideas require thinking, require actual argument, require essays, require time, and social media is not good for that.
Hello, thank you for your speech. I want to ask, who is your favorite individualistic people from history, from the past, and do you follow some other entrepreneurs who also might be, who do you follow, in terms of contemporary people?
Contemporary people. So, in the past, I'm chairman of the Ayn Rand Institute, so I'm a huge fan of Ayn Rand, so you should all read Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead and Ayn Rand's philosophical essays. So I'm a huge fan of hers. Philosophers that I like, people like Aristotle, Spinoza, John Locke, kind of Enlightenment thinkers of the time, and then they're the great economists, von Mises, Menger, and many others. The economics has probably had more kind of advocates for individualistic ideas than other fields. But then, of course, individualists, I would say, even in history, I'd say a lot of them are entrepreneurs, right? I mean, think about who, people talk about who, America's being this incredibly rich country. Well, what made it rich? It's not generals, it's not politicians. What made America rich once it was founded, I'll give the credit to the political entrepreneurs that created America, Jefferson and Madison and those guys, right? They were real individualists. But then after that, it's all businessmen, right? It's the great businessmen of the 19th century who built up the country. They made America what it is. So there's a whole list of them. In terms of entrepreneurs today, I mean, my favorite entrepreneur, sadly, is died a few years ago, and that's Steve Jobs. I think Steve Jobs is an incredibly admirable character. Today, it's harder. If Elon Musk stopped talking, I would admire him. But his tweets undermine, I think, his greatness as an entrepreneur. Sadly, he latches on to the latest collectivistic, stupid thing that he can. I'm a big fan of Amazon, so Jeff Bezos is amazing. But there are a lot of them, both in the field of tech and in biotech. I think we're going to see a lot of revolutionary stuff coming out of biotechnology. So, Yeah, there's no shortage of admirable people in business. Whether that translates into their politics and into their philosophy is a different question.
Okay, so you mentioned microchips issue, and I have a question.
So you have to slow down.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so you mentioned microchips issue at the start of your speech, and I have a question about that, because I think that we all agree that production of such strategic resource shouldn't be concentrated on vulnerable area that could be attacked by communist regime at any moment.
Yep.
But you criticized state-based solution, but
Yep.
is there any market-based solution that could help us out with this issue? And generally it's part of wider question because, well, we are in Poland, there's world out there, and so how could market-based solution, individualism-based solution guarantee our strategic safety? Isn't state better at guaranteeing that?
So there's no question, I'm not an anarchist, so just be clear. I do believe in a state, and I believe in the state's job is to do exactly that, is to protect our security, and to have a military and to engage in what is truly required for national defense. But what is truly required, because national defense is almost always used as an excuse by politicians, as an excuse to regulate and control and do industrial planning. So let's take chips. So yes, there's no question that there is a massive strategic problem with the fact that 90% of all advanced chips today are made in Taiwan, which is threatened by China. I think the other 10% are made in South Korea, which is also to some extent threatened by China because you have to cross the Pacific Ocean in order to get to the United States. So you have a real... US and Netherlands. Well, the Netherlands makes the equipment that makes the chips, right? ASML, there's one company in the world that makes the equipment that you need in order to make chips. And it's equipment that costs hundreds of millions of dollars, and ASML in the Netherlands makes it. They don't produce chips. They produce the equipment that makes the chips. The United States, this is the beauty of globalization, right? The United States does all the chip design. So all the advanced chip designs are made in the United States. So the real added value, the biggest added value in terms of value is ASML in the Netherlands and design in the United States. What you have in Taiwan and in South Korea is, relatively speaking, the lowest value in the supply chain. But it's still important because you have to make the chips in the end, right? So the question is, how do you get that production, how do you shift that production away from places that are so strategically problematic? There are two things. In the short run, what you need to do is make sure that China doesn't invade Taiwan. And it's relatively easy to do that. All that has to happen is the United States has to make it clear that if China tries to invade Taiwan, the United States will enter that war. And China will not do it. China does not want to engage with the United States. It assumes it's going to wait for the point in which it believes the United States will not enter. I think this war in Iran and other places have shown, at least technically, that nobody wants to actually fight the U.S. military. It's not a good idea. You're not going to win that battle. So that's in the short run. In the long run, I think the idea would be to find ways to bring production to places that are not risky. And that does not mean to bring them to the most expensive place in the universe to produce chips, which is the United States. So I can imagine a chip industry in South America. I could imagine a chip industry in parts of Europe. I could imagine a chip industry anywhere other than Southeast Asia, where the Chinese are a threat. Now, how do you do that? You can do that in a variety of different ways. One is deregulate, right? I mean, one of the reasons that China today produces all the rare earth materials that we consume, right, is because we don't allow for mining and production in the United States. That's not because of costs. It's purely because of regulations. Right? The environmental regulations in the US do not allow you to mine. There's plenty of rare earth materials in Montana and Wyoming and lots of other places, around the world for that matter. And there's plenty of technical ability to mine and use those resources. So all we have to do is deregulate and allow for actual production to happen in the West. The way in which I think, for national security reason, you deal with chips is you say to chip companies the following. You say, look, we will buy X number of chips at above market prices for 10 years if the chip comes from a friendly country that is not in the Pacific, in that part of the Pacific. And let entrepreneurs then figure out where they want to build the chip manufacturing, let them compete to provide the US military with those chips. Don't subsidize, don't choose the winners and losers. Just say, I don't know who the winners and losers are going to be. I don't know which country it should be. Maybe it should be in Europe, maybe it should be in Latin America, but I will guarantee that I will buy all the chips you can make at 20% above market. And let entrepreneurs figure out, and I think you deal with that with a lot of these national security issues. A lot of procurement for the military can be dealt by methods like that rather than direct, straight investment. I mean, look at what Ukraine's done in drones and how they've allowed a whole industry to be created, not through central planning in the government, literally units in the field on the front lines can choose which drone company they buy the drones from. They've completely decentralized the procurement, the buying of these weapon systems, and encouraged the whole entrepreneurial, industrial base to be created. And they're today the most innovative people in the world in terms of drones, because their drones actually work in the battlefield. I mean, I'm sure America makes more sophisticated drones, but whether they work or not, who knows? Same with China, right? Particularly with China, when doubts whether they work or not. I think there was a question up here. Yeah.
How do you see the future of the Western civilization? And do you think that ideas of free markets and individualism will win or lose over time?
Yeah, so how do I see Western civilization, the future Western civilization, and do I think the ideas of individualism will win over time? Look, I'm pessimistic in the short run, right? I just don't see where the energy around individualism is going to come from. It seems like all the energy right now is either on the far left or on the far right. And there's almost no energy around the ideas of capitalism, liberty, freedom, and individualism, which is at the core of it. I think that in the long run, individualism will win. Where exactly it'll win, who knows? In terms of geography, at the end of the day, what we care about is civilization. I don't care where it happens, but I want civilization to progress, and for that we need a respect for individualism. In the long run, good ideas win out. But how long the long run is, I do not know. In the short run, I just don't see where it happens. I don't see who and where you get this energy around freedom and liberty and individualism. If I was here talking about, either some leftist communist ideology, or if I was here talking about some right-wing nationalist crazy thing, this place would be packed with hundreds of people, right? I'm talking about liberty and freedom, and yeah, I mean, this is nice, but this is a pretty small group if we're trying to change the world. So I can't be overly optimistic right now. So I fear that the problem is that we misdiagnose what civilization and what Western civilization is. If we revert back to religion as the solution, then again, that's a reactionary force, and we're basically moving backwards, not forwards. It's not a civilizing, it's not in the direction of more civilization. I think she wants a microphone.
Okay, last question, someone?
All right, I would like to regard the threat because earlier you told about the mission of the state, which was to guarantee that no individual is under threat. And how would you define the threat? Isn't it a way to misuse of the institutions, to, let's say, define the border of some interest of individual too far?
So the threat, I believe that the threat to your rights is always physical. That is somebody coming and taking your stuff, somebody coming and punching you in the face. That is the threat. So as long as physical force is not used or threatened, right? If I threaten to punch you in the face, that's a violation already. Then the state has no business unless that is going on. So the only role of the state is to step in when I've got my fist raised to punch you, or when I've told you I'm going to punch you in the face, or when I've already punched you. That's it. So the threat isn't about my emotions. It isn't a threat to my job. You don't have a right to a job. It isn't a threat to your culture, because you don't have a right to your culture. I think Brian Kaplan has a book just came out called You Don't Have a Right to Your Culture, and he's absolutely right, you don't. If you want your culture, then fight for it. Preserve it. Not fight for it physically, fight for it intellectually. So threats need to be objectively defined. And in terms of states, the threat is somebody invades you, somebody comes in and rapes and murders your citizens. I can think of a particular date where that happened recently, right? Somebody invades, like Russia invaded Ukraine, or somebody for 40 years is killing you all over the world and threatening to murder you at every opportunity, and is building nuclear weapons that they say explicitly they're going to use against you. Well, that sounds like a threat that maybe the state should do something about. So you need an objective standard, and the standard is the threat or the existence of physical force against you.
Thank you, Yaron.
Thank you.